In the early 1990s, video games were undergoing a technical identity crisis. Sprites were reaching their limits, cartridges were becoming prohibitively expensive, and true 3D graphics were still awkward, experimental, and unstable. Into this moment stepped Sony, an electronics giant with no console history, but deep expertise in silicon, audio, and optical media. What they built wasn't just a successful console, it was a platform that rewired how games were engineered. This is the technical story of the original Sony PlayStation and how its release changed the industry forever. Sony's entry into gaming began not with graphics, but sound. Ken Kutaragi's design of the SPC 700 audio processor for the Super Nintendo proved Sony could deliver specialized silicon at scale, but it also exposed Nintendo's strict control over licensing and hardware direction. The failed PlayStation CD-ROM partnership freed Sony from Nintendo's ecosystem entirely. Instead of building an accessory for an aging architecture, Sony chose to design a ground-up 32-bit console optimized for 3D graphics and optical media. This decision shaped every technical choice that followed. Sony's hardware teams deliberately avoided bleeding-edge experimental designs. Their core philosophy was sustained real-world performance matters more than peak theoretical specs. Unlike the Sega Saturn with its dual CPUs and fragmented graphics pipeline, the PlayStation emphasized a single main CPU, clear division of labor between components, and deterministic performance behavior. Developers needed to understand the hardware intuitively and exploit it repeatedly. The PlayStation used a 32-bit MIPS R3000A compatible CPU clocked at 33.86 MHz. While not revolutionary, it was efficient, well documented, and familiar to developers coming from workstations. The real advantage came from the Geometry Transformation Engine, or the GTE. The GTE was a fixed function coprocessor capable of vector and matrix multiplication, perspective transformations, lighting calculations, and clipping operations. This allowed the CPU to offload expensive 3D math, dramatically increasing polygon throughput without requiring a faster core. In practice, this made the PlayStation far more capable at 3D than its clock speed suggested. The PlayStation GPU was unapologetically raw. It supported flattened garage shading, texture map triangles and quads, semi-transparency effects, no perspective correct textures, and no hardware Z-buffer. Instead of depth buffering, developers used manual polygon sorting, often via ordering tables built each frame by the CPU and GTE. The result was visual instability, texture warping and jitter, but enormous speed gains. Sony traded visual precision for fill rate and polygon count, betting that developers would hide artifacts with art direction. And they were right. Memory was limited but tightly organized. It had 2 MB of main system RAM, 1 MB of VRAM, 512 KB of sound RAM, and 32 KB of instruction plus data cache. Crucially, the system used a flat memory model, eliminating the complexity of bank switching found in earlier consoles. Developers learned to stream assets directly from CD, reuse geometry aggressively, and build levels around memory reuse rather than storage limits. The constraints shaped an entire generation's design philosophy. The PlayStation's sound processing unit, SPU, was a standout feature. It supported 24 simultaneous 80 PCM voices, hardware reverb and envelope control, sample-based synthesis, and CD-quality streaming audio. This made spoken dialogue, ambient soundscapes, cinematic music, not just possible, but practical. It's why games like Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil could rely heavily on voice acting and audio storytelling. The PlayStation's 2x CD-ROM drive was slow but transformative. At 650 megabytes per disc, developers gained vast asset storage, cheap manufacturing, and minimal financial risk. And Sony actively encouraged FMV cutscenes, pre-rendered backgrounds, and digital music and speech. Load times became the trade-off, but the scale of games exploded. Sony invested aggressively in developer support. Their SDKs featured robust C-based APIs, PC-hosted debugging environments, and detailed hardware documentation. Equally important, Sony lowered licensing fees, reduced approval restrictions, and welcomed Western studios into the mix. This made the PlayStation the easiest high-performance console to develop for in its era. As developers mastered the platform, optimization techniques emerged. Fixed point math pipelines, texture page batching, aggressive draw distance control, and hybrid real-time and pre-rendered visuals. Iconic titles followed. You had Gran Turismo, which pushed geometry and simulation, Final Fantasy VII, which used pre-rendered scenes to bypass the system's RAM limits, and Metal Gear Solid, which blended scripting and real-time rendering seamlessly. And the PlayStation's limitations became stylistic strengths. The Sony PlayStation launched in Japan on December 3rd, 1994, North America on September 9th, 1995, and then in Europe on September 29th, 1995. Its launch price in the US was $299, undercutting the Sega Saturn by $100. Thanks to CD-ROM manufacturing and efficient hardware design, Sony could sell the console profitably earlier. They could price games lower than cartridge-based competitors, and they could scale production rapidly. The result was explosive adoption. By the late 90s, the PlayStation dominated third-party development. Sega struggled with the Saturn's complexity, and Nintendo's cartridge-based Nintendo 64 fell behind in software volume. By the end of its lifespan, the original PlayStation had sold over 102 million units worldwide. It became the first console in history to cross 100 million sales. It became the foundation for Sony's long-term dominance in gaming, as well as the blueprint for modern console ecosystems. The PlayStation wasn't the most powerful console of its generation, but it was predictable, affordable, and developer-friendly. It normalized CD-based gaming, 3D first design, cinematic presentation, and third-party driven success. Sony didn't win by brute force, they won by building a machine that developers wanted to use and players couldn't ignore. Alright, Oklasoft here, signing out of another video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Subscribe if you are new or you got some, enjoyment out of the channel, if you think it's worthwhile, and I will continue making these videos. So yeah, hit the sub and like and the whole thing, and I appreciate you watching till the end, and I appreciate your viewership. Hope you have an awesome rest of your week. Alright, peace out.